Hey everybody.
Hey everybody.
This is Hob.
And this is Jamie.
And we're doing a Dutch and Dragons.
Dutch and Dragons.
It's time for another episode of
Dutch and Dragons.
There we go. See, that's better.
There it's better.
This is a show where we talk about Dungeons and Dragons. It's rather unedited and sort of unscripted. We just answer questions out of the box about playing role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, and game mastering and crap like that. So without further ado, the questions.
Question number 1 for the day. The question is, this is like a big ass piece of paper.
It is obviously not one of the printed ones.
How do you stop your PCs from hoarding things like potions? Ooh, this is a good question.
That's a tough one. So, hoarding is I think in most players a holdover from video games.
Oh yeah.
So the idea is you hoard the resources until you absolutely need them because there might be a bigger, badder boss fight coming up.
Yep.
So you have to recondition your players,
operant conditioning.
Which means doing things like making sure that there are always plenty of health potions available, making them expire. Is one tactic that we are attempting, and we'll let you know if it works.
There are a couple of schools of thought about player hoarding. One school of thought is that you give them so much of something that it's not worth hoarding. So they have so many health potions, or whatever it is that they're trying to hoard. We're just using health potions because that's a pretty common item for players to hoard, I feel.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So you give them so many health potions that hoarding them is kind of like pointless. Because they know after playing for a while that there will always be another health potion around the corner. The other school of thought is, to make them expire. To be like, here is your health potion. It's a really great health potion, but it's only going to last a session or 2 sessions, or once it's exposed to the air, it's only good for a certain amount of time in which to encourage players to use them. All of these methods have bonuses and negative things. Like if you're trying to make it hard and there's an overabundance of health potions, maybe that's not a really great thing. Sometimes your players might feel cheated if you make things expire on them. Sometimes they don't. I mean, you just have to weigh your options. The other option that people go with for encouraging their players not to hoard is they make house rules where drinking a potion is no longer an action, it's a bonus action.
Right.
So they make it easier to use.
Yes. Our solution has been sort of twofold. So we're using the house rule that health potions can be consumed in a bonus action.
Yep.
Purchased stable health potions do not expire. Health potions found in the wild or unstable or unique health potions
will expire.
Have functions that cause them to either reduce in potency until they are no longer useful, or poisonous in some cases, or they flat out expire in 1 or 2 sessions from the time that they're found.
Yeah.
And that we're hoping will actually help cure our players of some of their hoarding problems, because they do tend to hoard.
But as far as getting your players to hoard, and sometimes I have been known in my games to say, guys, there are going to be lots of health potions. You are going to have plenty of these. There's no reason not to use them. I'm just going to be straight with you. Here is an item, health potions or magic rings or whatever, and you're going to be like, there are going to be a lot of these. Just use them. You just do it.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'm just pretty straightforward about it.
All right, I'm going to read the next question.
You're going to read the next question.
I am.
Here we go. Next question.
Next question is a tiny one.
Tiny?
Ooh. Do you think there is a social stigma to playing D&D?
Like the whole nerds in the basement sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I feel like there are groups of people who know better by now. But I think that the majority of people, you say, well, I've got D&D night, and they're like, ha 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 ha, you play D&D. Yeah. So yes, but no. Yes, but no. I mean, like...
Yeah,
well,
I mean, yes. Yes, there are. In some
stigmas.
circles, there are definitely social stigmas. And you're going to run into that with any kind of hobby that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, there are. But not in the same way that there used to be. I think people are a lot more open to the idea with the advent of computer role-playing games has really piqued a lot of people's interest who may not necessarily have been interested in something like Dungeons and Dragons in the past. So, yes, but that stigma, I think, is going away and maybe changing for the better, too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, anything you do has stigma. If, football players are dumb and Dungeons and Dragons players are geeks. And, I mean, it's out there.
Yeah.
Something everyone has to deal with.
It is.
Ready? My turn?
All right. Give it.
What themes, genres, or game styles do you struggle with as a GM, as a game master?
Ooh.
Now, what's hard
That's an
for you to
interesting
run?
question.
What's hard style of games for you to run? I know mine. I really struggle with things that have lots and lots of combat heavy, or mass combat. I struggle with mass combat. I do all the different tips and tricks on how to run mass combat. I have tried them all. It's still really hard.
Mass combat is really hard. I think I struggle the most with pre-generated structured adventures. Not necessarily genre specific, but adventures where everything is kind of locked in stone and they've kind of pre-written everything out for you and there's not a great deal of flexibility. I struggle with those quite a bit. I'm a seat of your pants kind of dungeon master. I tend to make things up as I go along. Like I have a loose plan of what we're doing and what and I know what the end goal is, but how we get there
is all up to the universe.
It's exploratory AF.
See, but I like that kind of. I prefer that kind of thing because I feel like you can make it more personal to the players.
Right, absolutely. All right, ordering coffee time.
Hi.
Hey.
What are we getting today?
Small iced extra shot coconut milk caramelizer.
All right.
And a small iced German chocolate mocha with coconut milk. And I'm gonna roll.
Does the second mocha have an extra shot?
No.
Okay, cool. So we've got a small triple iced coconut milk caramelizer and a small iced coconut milk German chocolate milk.
Yes.
Cool. And you're paying with card.
Yes.
Cool. 20 for you?
Yep.
How's your day?
Good.
Good. It's getting toasty again. Not super happy about it, but that's okay.
But the heat's coming. Bring it on.
Oh,
Yeah, we've had a surprisingly mild May.
Yeah, we've been
Which has
kind
been
of
so nice.
blessed. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm really cool with the nice weather.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.
All right, so.
All right, so
Are we ready for the next?
I think so.
Because you were talking
think
about.
Oh, yeah, I'm really very much an exploratory game master. I like to explore the world as much as my players do, and often I'm doing it at the same time my players are.
I think it's more fun that way, personally. But I do think, don't get us wrong, we're not down on pre-made adventures. Pre-made adventures have their place.
Oh, I
they're
beg,
awesome.
borrow, and steal from them all the time.
Oh yeah, so we're not getting down on those pre-mades. Keep making them, but we prefer to be a little more loose with our pre-mades.
Yes.
Yes, there's something there's a sexual joke in there somewhere. I just don't know where it is.
Probably right here.
Oh, how do you handle intimate or sexual situations in your game?
Honestly, they haven't come up very often in our game.
I've only had like 2 or 3
Yeah,
instances
we've only
where
had a
that's
couple
happened.
in the several years that we've been running and playing. We've only had a few instances where overtly sexual situations came up, and I think we all just sort of agreed that we glossed past it. There was no heavily descriptive.
No, I don't get heavily descriptive. What I did when I was DMing and one of these came up, and I was like, okay, so you and this other person, you go into the back, and you guys can hear it, man. You hear the, you know? But that's it. Like that,
true.
I like to do like stupid things like that. He comes out, your hair's disheveled, and I go before sound effects, after.
And I think that's something that if it does occur, if it does come up in your campaign, it's probably a good idea to really gauge the comfort level of your players, because it can certainly be very awkward. I would say err on the side of caution and don't go for anything overtly descriptive or graphic or heavily sexual, unless your players are really into that.
I sat down at one table where I swear the whole point was sexual encounters. I was a player in this game.
I'm sorry.
But that was like 90...
Wasn't at my table.
No, it was not at your table, but it was 90% of the game was
brown chicken, brown cow.
Was brown chicken, brown cow. Yeah,
right.
And I was like, okay, so this is really weird. It's like sexting without the computers, but all right.
Yeah.
It was
So gauge your audience, gauge your players. If they really push for it, if your whole table is okay with it, go as far as you're comfortable with going.
Yeah, see, I didn't go back to that game.
I wouldn't have.
I just didn't. I was like, that's cool, good for you guys, but that's not my style of game.
I try and keep it very PG-13.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I mean, besides all the swearing in our games,
there
are a lot of dirty jokes in our games, but it doesn't really go beyond that. How do you stop your players from attacking everything that moves? Oh, this is a good one, because our players used to do that when they started playing. They attacked everything. They were like, oh, it breathes, kill it! Like, you know, for us, I think that all stopped when we had a player join the game, and she was a little more, not D&D heavy, but just role-play games in general. Like, she did a lot more fantasy role-playing games than the people at our table did. And she would start going, but don't we want to ask them questions? Don't you want to know what's going on? And they were like, oh, hey, yeah, maybe it would be a good idea if we stopped and, like, interrogated them.
Yeah, so sometimes introducing a new player who is a little more inquisitive in their play style can help. Having real consequences for their actions. If they attack everything that moves and breathes, well, then there are consequences to that, and they gain a reputation in the world where towns will literally shut their doors to them and tell them simply go away. Well, we don't want you here because you murder everything in sight. You bring nothing but trouble.
It's like Fable when you play the bad, they run away from you.
Yeah, so having social consequences can help with that. Also having combat consequences. You know, the cleric begins to lose their abilities. So does the paladin. You can have all sorts of consequences that are built into the game system to address those sorts of things. Don't be afraid to talk to your players outside of the game either.
Yeah.
Remind them, hey, you know, this might not be the best situation.
This might not be the best way to go about
for this kind of for the kind of encounter you're leaning towards. This might not go the way that you think it's going to go. And getting coffee.
Another part of that, I feel like, is pregame. I'll talk about that in a second.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Alright, you guys just had your small triple shot cookie with caramel lace.
Yes.
And a German chocolate one?
Yes.
Alrighty.
Cool.
So this is going to be the caramelizer.
Alright.
And then I got that German chocolate one here.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.
I think it's...
I'm stealing your pink straw. I'm stealing it. It's my
cool.
pink straw.
You can have the pink straw.
I
It's
like
all
the
right.
pink straw. Okay, we're clear. So I was talking about a thing, and I said, "Hold on, guys. I'll say something about this." Oh, pre-game, before the game even starts, like session 0. Sometimes it's a good idea, even if you've got players that you're not sure about. This is their first rodeo, or they're players that you know, and they tend to be a little murder hobo-y. Maybe in the first session, you say, "Hey, this isn't going to be the kind of game where you want to murder everything that you encounter." Just straight up say it before you start.
Yeah, set the expectation.
If it's there are dungeon crawls where you're like, nobody wants to talk to you in this dungeon. It's a murder hobo game.
Yeah.
So sometimes just saying it up front.
Yeah, sometimes being outright about it, or forthright about it, and setting that expectation ahead of time. A dungeon crawl is almost always going to be a murder hobo-y type situation, so, set the expectations.
All right. Last question for today. Is there such a thing as a campaign that is too open world? Yes.
Absolutely. And we've run into this where we said to our players, we are going to present you with a whole bunch of options, and your choices decide the direction of the campaign.
Do whatever you want to do. Boy, was that a mistake.
Yes, and we seeded a great number of quests and side quests and options for the players, and they tried to do all of them, and we kept telling them that you're not going to be able to do everything, and not all and we had some that were tied together and some that weren't, and they just decided that they were all tied together for no real explicable reason.
Our expectation is that they would find a plot line, a single plot line that appealed to them, and that they would chase it down. That was what we thought was going to happen.
That's what we thought would happen.
Then we'd check out several different storylines and several different plots, and we'll find one that we really like, and we'll chase it. That is not what happened. They went, ooh, shiny! Ooh, shiny!
They suffered a very bad case of squirrel.
Oh, yeah, they did.
And so every time a new job came up, they'd squirrel on it. And they'd be like, oh, let's go do that. Well, and we're like, what about this? And they're like, oh, no, this is new and shiny, and we're going over here. Okay.
And it kind of it did. It sort of blew up in our faces. So we were like, all right, we're going to have to roll this back, because they weren't getting anywhere. They were doing the beginnings of all the storylines that we had set into the world, but they weren't doing anything else.
And because they were doing the beginnings of all the storylines, they weren't actually getting any information that was helpful to pushing any of the storylines forward.
And so they were frustrated.
So they were frustrated, and we were frustrated, and we didn't feel like they were paying attention to what we were putting in front of them, and they felt like we were telling them that they needed to do all of these things.
Yeah, so it was just one of those things that was just too much, too fast. And if I had to do it over again, I would have given them the option to branch off, but I would have done it slower. Instead of putting 5 different cool adventures in front of them all at once, I would have, done one here or there.
And I think that we also shot ourselves in the foot, because we put sort of the fit and form quests in there, escort quests, fetch quests, things like that. And one thing we learned very quickly was don't bother. They're not interesting.
They're
not. If they don't directly drive your story forward, leave it out. It's not important.
Yeah. So I think you can have a world that is a little too open, especially since we were 5-6 sessions in, and they hadn't gotten any of the cool gear that had been seeded in the world. They hadn't found any of the cool magic items, because those were all meant to be found later in a storyline and doing the beginnings of all of them. So here we are, seven, 8 sessions in,
and they have crappy gear. They haven't really gotten anywhere in the story, and everybody was frustrated, including us.
Yep. So we said, "Hey, this is our bad. This was our mistake."
Yep. And we kind of retconned a few things, which is to retroactively create continuity in your story. So we retconned a few
Which
things.
you don't really want to do, but in
generally,
some
you
instances,
want to avoid that, but every once in a while it's necessary. And we put things back on track, but not on rails. We still left it with a semi-open world, semi-open storyline, but we said, hey, we need to finish out this particular storyline first, and then we'll go from there. And so we put them on very loose rails. We still gave them the control of how they finished that story out, and that seemed to work out pretty well for our players,
But I love
and put us
open
back on track.
Worlds and big worlds and rich worlds. I just think that you can throw too much at your players too fast, and then your players can get lost.
Now there is a way of doing this, which is a West Marches style game, which is where you have a sort of central base of operations, but your players are exploring the world out from that central base, and so there are different adventures seeded throughout the exploration process that they can encounter, but they're not directly handed to them like a quest or a what we did was an adventurer's guild or a hunter's guild, where they were actually receiving the jobs and then being paid for going out and doing them. And so there are some ways of doing that I think are definitely
Worth doing.
It's a matter of figuring out what works for you and your players. And excuse me, I have the hiccups.
Into that in another box, but
Yes, absolutely.
but
So
we're out of time.
that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all once again for joining us.
Yep.
If you enjoy what you're doing,
what we're doing.
what she said.
Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, then the little bell, ding, ding, ding.
Right, and
So-
if you have questions or comments for us, please leave them down below. We'll read all of them, and we'll be more than happy to discuss and or read your questions on our show. So
Ta-da!
thank you again. Have a great day, everybody.
Good adventuring.